putting one of these in the recent and a new edition. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for doing that for us, and we'll hear more about it shortly. So have a good look at it while you're here. Isn't that gorgeous? There's the creator right there, that Bill Hyde.
Spent last Friday with Bill. Thank you, sir.
Right.
Maybe you could get their picture with Bill, could you?
That'd be a good idea. Yeah, Margate, would you come up and take another picture?
Would you stand in front of the collage and let the boys get their picture taken with you? There.
Could we get a picture of the three of you, just standing so that you can see the collage? And something like that. Could you move over just a bit, Bill?
Closer, Ted.
There, that's great. Okay, how's that? Another handsome crew.
Smile.
Thank you, gentlemen. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. Sorry, oh, one more picture, Bob. Thanks very much, gentlemen. Thank you. With these three beautiful creations here, and I hope I didn't steal any of your thunder.
You stole it all.
Our good friend Derry is great for introducing things. He goes over the agenda and mentions everything that the person that was supposed to say that was on the agenda. I wanted to explain to the group that our Lakefield Historical Society has received a remarkable donation, a gift from our member and past executive, Don Webster. I'd also like to point out that Don was planning and intending to be here this evening and to make the presentation of these gifts to our society, but he was summoned to Toronto General Hospital for emergent heart surgery, and they operated on Don last Friday morning, and I've been attempting to determine just how he is feeling and how he recovered from the surgery, and I haven't been able to get the information yet. He was certainly looking forward to this presentation, and I know that he called me. He's such a thorough individual. Even with all these things pending, and this surgery and him not being in good health, out he drives to my home to give me these and ask me if I would not mind presenting them to the LHS on his behalf. Certainly I wouldn't mind, and I have so done. So without further ado, I'd like to, Margot, perhaps you'd come up and assist me, would you, in unveiling? No, you can't pull the rug out from under anyone? Good for you. We'll just leave it then. There's the first one, and these were all at Don's expense, and the first one is of Perce Payne, local boy, son of Art and Katie, brother of Mackie, and he was in the Royal Canadian Navy, and he had this collage done, and by none other than our guest this evening, Bill Hyde, and secondly, his wife, sexual preference. His wife, Romaine Millward was her name at the time she served in the Canadian Army, and she became Perce's wife, Romaine Payne, which many of you knew. At one time she had a dress shop in the village here, and a very fine lady, very sedate, wonderful lady to meet. And that was the other collage. And the third is Mr. Hugh Harvey. Hugh Harvey was a boy who grew up in Lakefield. He's the son of our high school principal, who was quite noted in his day, Mr. John Harvey. And incidentally, John Harvey's father at one time was principal of Lakefield High School. So we had John Harvey's father, principal, John Harvey, principal, and Hugh was raised, I believe, on Regent Street most of the time, and this is his collage. We are so thankful to add this to our Lakefield Historical Society collection. When you get an opportunity, I'd ask that you come up and have a look at them and check out the details. Thank you. I'm popping up and down. I think I'm a slice of bread and a toaster, really. But anyhow, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our speaker for this evening. I'm going to try to cover one or two points that Derry didn't. Our guest this evening, our guest speaker, is Mr. Bill Hike, and he is the owner of Vimy Ridge Gallery in Buckhorn, where he has lived and operated this business for 23 years. Here's an indication of some of the beautiful work that he does, and it reflects his infatuation and his interest and his knowledge of military things. Of special interest to our audience is the local connection. Bill's wife, Carol, who is with us this evening, her aunt was married to Sam Sharon of the Lakefield Sharons, and who were one of our early pioneer families and quite renowned for their contribution. And Sharon's, I believe, had the very first store in Lakefield. Oh yes, always come prepared. Bill was recently recognized, and when he was awarded the Queen's Jubilee Medal for his preservation of military memorabilia. It's my pleasure to present for our enjoyment, Mr. Bill Hike. Bill.
Does this work? Oh, it does. Wish I could sing. Really, really neat. Thank you very much, Les and Derry, for the introduction. I brought a whole folder full of notes here, and now they're no good because you've told them I'm talking about something that isn't in here. So anyway, we'll carry on from there. I want to thank the Lakefield Historical Society and all its members for allowing me to be here this evening. I love to talk about our military heritage, and I'm going to confine it this evening.
Can you hear Bill back there? Yeah, okay. Sorry.
That's they're better?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hold it a little closer. I had the privilege of meeting Ted Morin last Friday, I believe it was. Ted came up to the gallery, and we spent the afternoon together, and just fabulous. What he knows about the Devil's Brigade, or what he's learned about the Devil's Brigade, which is the first special service force in the Canadian Army, is just astounding. I feel that I'm a military fanatic when it comes to studying our own military history, but Ted has done a fine job at studying the ISSF, which is the first special service force, and we'll talk about that later this evening. But they said, at least Derry said, that I was going to explain what the insignia was here, and I'll try and stand out of the way while I do it. This little red arrow here, or large red arrow, says Canada, USA. The force was a combination of American and Canadian troops, and that red arrow was adopted because when they first got together, they called themselves the Braves. they were in Indian territory in Utah and that, and they started calling or referring them to themselves as the Braves. And it was much later on that they became known as the Devil's Brigade, which I'll get to in a few minutes. The Devil's Brigade and both Canadians and Americans were awarded a parachute wing or jump wing. The Canadian wing is the cloth one here at the top. The metal one is the American the parachute wing. And this insignia down here indicates that Ted Morin was in Canadian terms, he was a staff sergeant. In American terms, he was a master sergeant. In my terms, a master sergeant in the Devil's Brigade was the equivalent of a major in the Canadian Army. They were so well trained. I'll go on to, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but Ted was already overseas. And I have something to explain to you, and I'll see that it's corrected, and I'll do it at my expense. There's a medal missing in here. Evidently, when Ted came to the gallery, he showed me his father's original medals, and I just about fell over. I said, I don't have that defense medal in the group. And I didn't have the defense medal in the group because I had assumed, an assumption is the mother of catastrophe, but I did it anyway. I had assumed that he had joined the SDGs, Glenvarans, here in Canada, and was posted to the service force. I'm not completely sure right now, but did you not say, Ted, that your father was with the Seaforth Highlanders? No? Then I'm thinking about, I had a bad dream the other night, okay? He was with the SDGs, but the SDGs were with the 3rd Division, and I was surprised then that he would be in England at that time. Anyway, his father, Eddie, which is a very young picture of him here. Actually, I was that young once. Wasn't I, Carol? Okay. She won't admit it. What I have to say about the display is that it's missing a medal, and I'll look after replacing it. There's room for it. But the first medal here is the 3945 star, which was awarded for being involved in a war action, an actual action involving the enemy. The Italy Star is for service throughout the Italy campaign, and the ribbon colors are the red, green, and white, which is the colors of the Italian flag. This other medal, pardon my pointing, with the bar on it, is the CVSM, or a Canadian Volunteer Service Medal, with overseas bar. That should have meant something to me when the overseas bar was on there, because unless he was in England, he wouldn't have that bar. But I have some senior moments, okay? Actually, there's a picture here of his tunic, and I've seen the real thing. I don't know if you have it here tonight.
We were going to unveil that, I forgot that.
Did you? Well, let's do that.
Let's unveil it right now. It's right beside you here.
One thing I didn't have a chance to do was see if it fits me. So. I'll hold it up here. No, I don't think it would fit. But this is the original tunic that Eddie wore as a member of a very elite force, the Devil's Brigade.
How old was he then? How old was he at that time?
Well, I have no idea, but I think he was very young. Eddie showed another picture to me, and he looked to be about 18 or 19. And that, do you know Ted?
Not really.
You don't?
19, 20, something like that.
Well, like all of our armed forces and what happens at wartime is our young people sign up, and the old veterans try to get in there, and they usually wind up in the Home Guard. The young people, I'm going to talk about them in just a moment. I want to just, I'll comment on these 3 other displays later. There were just a couple of things I'd like to bring you up to date on. But I want to talk about the most elite military force that the world has really ever seen. With exception, today now they have the killing equipment to do better jobs when they have to. But these guys, they were trained with a rifle or a machine gun, a pistol, and a dagger. That's all they had. The concept of the force was that they'd become capable of fighting behind enemy lines. And of all things, it was proposed by a scientist, Geoffrey Pike. Geoffrey Pike was a scientist in Britain, and he proposed this project. They called it Project Plough to begin with, to Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was head of the Combined Operations Unit in England. Anyway, that was turned over to General Eisenhower as a proposal, and Eisenhower had the task of assigning someone to train and create what would be an American-Canadian elite unit, and that was Lieutenant Colonel Robert Frederick. Frederick was, I could talk for an hour about Frederick. He was a young man, he was aggressive, he was really an office person. He had never been in the field, and he had all the theory right here in his head. And he decided how he was going to train these troops and where he was going to train these troops and what they were going to be capable of. But they were primarily, set up to attack the Norwegian hydroelectric stations and oil fields in northern Italy. The hydroelectric stations in Norway were very important at that time to the Germans because they were using them to produce heavy water, which was furthering their German atomic weapon research. And believe it or not, that was very early in the war, and the atomic bomb wasn't until, well, 1945, the end of the war with Japan. The selection of the people for the training, is that better when I talk into it? They were rugged individuals, they were lumberjacks, miners, railroad engineers, native guides and trackers, and trained soldiers who were already in the Army, and in this case with Eddie already overseas. But Eddie joined up over there and was shipped back here to become part of the 1st Special Service Force. The original missions had been scratched at the time, and their first mission was in the Aleutian Islands, which are just off Alaska. And as Ted brought to my attention the other day, usually an invasion force, it's nice to have 4 times the number of people invading the people that are already there. But by the time the invasion force got there, the Japanese had decided to leave, probably just days before, because they were fully convinced that the Aleutian Islands were full of Japanese soldiers. Anyway, to carry on, one of the most noted battles that the Devil's Brigade were involved with was the Mount La Defensia. This was a mountain in Italy that had been holding up the advance of 20,000 Canadians and Americans and British troops. They just couldn't get past it. So the men of the 1st Special Service Force circled the mountain at night, climbed the mountain, and it was a sheer cliff that they had to climb with their packs on. They had to carry their armament, their rifle, which is, say, 14 pounds, but they also carried 150 to 200 pounds of ammunition, because once they were up there, they were on their own and they had to provide their own ammunition. To make a long story short, they did the job. They scaled the back of the mountain, got to the top, behind the Germans who were looking out over the valley, thinking, oh, these guys aren't going to get us. But the Devil's Brigade came from behind. I shouldn't really refer it to as the Devil's Brigade, because it wasn't called the Devil's Brigade at this time. It was another story. They were still known as the 1st Special Service Force. Anyway, that battle was finished within hours. They had captured the top of the mountain, and everybody was free to move north on the way to Rome. What the next point in the Italian campaign was at Anzio, and this is a very important point of the war, where the Devil's Brigade were consigned a wide margin of beach compared to the 17,000 supporting troops that were at Anzio. And Ted's father, Eddie, sorry, I do have to refer to notes here because the memory just is about that long sometimes. This was on May 23rd at approximately 3 p.m. The 3rd Company of the 1st Regiment, which Ted's father was in, Eddie, they were flanked on both sides. They were running low on ammunition, and all of a sudden they were facing a German Panzer Regiment, tanks. So 17 of the men of the 1st Special Service Force, this is the 1st, but 17 were taken prisoner. And Staff Sergeant, or Master Sergeant Eddie Morin was one of them. Now, I just made a little note here, Ted. German troops were ordered not to take the ISSF members alive. Did you realize that? How he survived the rest of the war in German imprisonment would be another story altogether, because he wasn't supposed to be there. Hitler wanted him dead. Isn't that dramatic? Can you believe that he survived that? Incredible. Ted, I salute you and your family on your father's efforts and what he did during the Second World War. And I hope that the display here, that you'll be proud to see it posted with the Historical Society here in Lakeville. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Now, just 2 or 3 other things.
I think that's walking in the line of the speaker.
I better stay here then. Okay. I'll come back here. With the, oh, it's not going to work.
Try the other side. Yeah, other side. There you go.
Here, I'm not going to be screaming at you then. This display with Staff Sergeant Romaine Millward, that's all the information I had. I didn't realize that she had been married to Percy Payne. Someone came into my gallery one day and they recognized Percy and they said, oh, there's Percy, and started telling me all about him. And then they looked on the other wall and I had Romaine hanging over there, and they said, and there's Percy's wife. I said, what? I had no idea, and I have her listed as Romaine Millward, which is, of course, her maiden name. I'll pass through the dead zone. Okay. Now, I may be wrong about this, but I was under the impression that Hugh Harvey, okay, the Harvey family, I was aware that his father was principal of the high school, and his father's father was very involved, but I also was led to believe that Hugh Harvey's great-great-grandfather was Sir Charles Harvey. Now, the Historical Society can look into this and carry it further, but his great-great-grandfather was Sir Charles Harvey, and I'm living in Harvey Township, named after Hugh Harvey's great-great-grandfather. That would be an interesting piece of research. Okay, I'm going to get into something I'm a little more comfortable with. I want to talk about our Canadian military heritage. It's a passion with me, and I've been working at hundreds of these displays over the past 20 or 25 years. And what I did here, I've listed key dates, which we will not have time to get into. But it covers a period from 1758 to 2012. That's 253 years. And I won't try and bore you with it right now. But I do want to, I was under the impression that maybe some high school students would be here this evening. I'm sorry to see they're not, because I was coming here to do a sales job on them. I think that our students, our younger people, have to be informed through the study of our history, and primarily our military history. Now, I'm not a politician, and I understand political science and political history is very important for young people growing up today. But we don't walk with the pride that we should be walking with. American children get out there and fly the flag. You see a flag on every veranda throughout the United States. We don't fly our flag well, and that bothers me. It really does. I get really upset because we don't teach Canadian history in school. Now, whether it's political or military or what, I feel that what our young men for 200 years have been accomplishing to protect this country and allow us to live the way we're living, they should have that due respect of being acknowledged through our educational system. I'm beginning to sound like this is going to be a Sunday sermon, and I don't mean to, but I'm really, really serious about getting this point across. And when I have had the opportunity to speak to the young people, I really lay it on thick. But there are so many things that we have accomplished as Canadians that I'm going to skip 3 pages of notes here that would give these young people the initiative or the incentive to have that pride and fly our flag well. Just as a matter of interest right now, in 1884, this isn't going back too far, and this is our local history. In 1884, the British Army came to Canada and recruited men in Peterborough and Lakefield and area for what they called the Nile Expedition. They recruited men who were experts in the handling of canoes and small boats right here in this area, and I have their names listed in a book at the gallery. But the Nile Expedition was to relieve the relief of Khartoum, where General Gordon had been holed up for 18 months. Now, I don't know how they did this without computers and without jet planes, but they came from Britain, rounded up the men here, the experts who were going to get the British Army down the Nile River to Khartoum. But they managed to do it. So why don't we rely so much on computers today? These people did it over 100 years ago, well in excess of 100 years ago. That's just one area of our history that I wanted to bring to your attention. I could go on and on. The Canadians in the Boer War, 1898 to 1902 in South Africa, we received 4 Victoria Crosses. the Canadians again came to the relief, and I'm going to come right out and say it, saved the British troops at the Battle of Hardeberg, and is still celebrated today by our RCR, Royal Canadian Regiment. The next point I'd like to make, I'm skipping over things here or we'll never get through everything, is our accomplishments in World War I, and the reason why I call my gallery, when people come in, I say, welcome to my playroom, because it's more my playroom than a gallery. I get in there every day. I don't have far to walk. The wife said when we first got married that she'd give me breakfast and dinner, but never be there for lunch. And now I've been there for lunch for 20 years, and it's worked out well. There's 6 feet between the gallery and the house. Anyway, we call it the Vimy Ridge Gallery. Why? Because at the Battle of Vimy Ridge, Canada gained its nationhood. It was the first time in history that Canadian troops fought as Canadian troops in 4 Canadian divisions, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Division. Now, these troops had all been raised in Canada, and at that time, our population was just under 3 million, and we're talking about 260 battalions that have been raised here, roughly 800 to 1,000 men per battalion. We're looking at 10% of our population was serving in France, and they were all between the ages, 80% of them were between the ages of 15 and 25. We had some of the old boys, which were 30 to 35 or 40 years old, over there with them, but it was all young kids in the trenches. I start to feel the pride that these young people must have had to go overseas at that age, at that time. Well, here's what happened. The British and the French, for 18 months, had tried to take Vimy Ridge, and they had lost something like, I'm trying to remember figures, say 60 to 70,000 casualties. Now, they weren't all killed, they were wounded and killed, but 60 to 70,000 of their young men had either lost their lives or were crippled for life at their battle of Vimy Ridge. So when it was assigned as a Canadian objective, the Canadians practiced on the ground. They practiced with their troops for about 3 months prior to the battle. And what we did was we developed a advancing artillery barrage. This was the big guns at the back, start firing. And they started the artillery attack 3 days before the Battle of Vimy Ridge, which was on Easter Monday, April 9th, 1917. For 3 days they shelled the Germans. There were something like 4.5 million rounds of ammunition spent. So the Germans were really dug in. They didn't want to come out of their trenches with all the shelling going on. And on the Monday morning, April 9, 1917, the Canadian division, all 4 divisions, climbed out of the trenches and proceeded to take the ridge. At noon, they had completed taking it. They were on the ridge by noon hour, and we had lost about 9,000, there was 9,000, so many hundred young fellows killed or out of action. I think it was only 3,000 killed and 6,000 badly wounded. But Canada had accomplished in a matter of hours what the French and the British had tried to accomplish in 18 months. So when you walk into the Vimy Ridge Gallery, that's what I wanted to represent, Canada's heritage, military heritage. and I'm proud of it. I know my family is proud of it, and we've produced these displays and many, many, many other displays over the past 20 years. Before I close, I want to, am I sounding better by talking? Okay. Before I close, I want to just talk about Canada and the Second World War. Excuse me. Because it seemed that every year since at the beginning of the war, Canada was involved. For example, in 1940, Canada was at Dunkirk. As a matter of fact, the 1st Canadian Division had been posted to Britain and had invaded France in 1940 to try and sum up the war right then. That wasn't about to happen. But with the Canadian Division, were the Hasty Peas, or the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment out of Peterborough, and they were so sure that they were going to win the day, clear France, that they took their mascot with them, which was a large wooden Indian, about 6 feet tall, a little taller than me. But they had to leave that Indian there. They buried it. And I've talked to many of the veterans. One veteran in particular was Tony Bassiano. Does the name Tony Bassiano mean anything here? Tony passed away a few years ago, but he was in my gallery constantly, and we had many, many chats. And he told me about the wooden Indian, the mascot, and it's never been recovered. Well, that was in 1940. In 1941, Canada was 2 Canadian regiments, the Winnipeg Rifles and the Royal Rifles of Canada, were sent to protect the Crown Colony of Hong Kong. That didn't work either, because on December 25th, our boys and the British troops and the French troops were defeated. But out of that came the first Victoria Cross of World War II was awarded to. Names are right on the tip of my tongue. It was Sergeant Major Osborne. Osborne was with the Winnipeg Rifles, and guess what? He was a First World War vet. He was one of the old boys over there. I think he was like 42 years old at the time. But he was the first Victoria Cross awarded in the Second World War was to a Canadian. Later on, 6 days before the end of World War II, the last Victoria Cross was issued to a Canadian. A young Canadian, 23 years old. He was in the Royal Canadian Naval Air Service, and his name was Robert Hampton Gray. And he died 6 days before the end of the war, and he was awarded the Victoria Cross posthumously. Unfortunately, so was Sergeant Osborne. He was awarded the VC posthumously. But over the years, I've put together a number of Victoria Cross displays, always Canadian, and you see one of them brings back some memory in that newspaper article at the back of the room. That was, I don't know the name, but I know he was born in Coburg. We'll get the name out of the newspaper after the show. Anyway, in World War II, Canada went from Dunkirk in 1940, Hong Kong in 1941, and then Dieppe in 1942. The 2nd Canadian Division was assigned the project for Dieppe. And again, it was a disaster. And again, we had 2 Victoria Crosses awarded for the Battle of Dieppe, and they survived to tell the story. One was to Reverend Foote of the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, and the other VC was to Lieutenant Colonel Charles Cecil Merritt with the South Saskatchewan Regiment. They were taken POWs and survived the end of the war. So we've gone to 1943. In 1943, the Canadians were in Sicily and Italy. And this is where the 1st Special Service Force were also involved in the Italian campaign, long before D-Day, which was in 1944. In 1944, on the 6th of June, the Canadians stormed the beaches of the Juno Beach, and there were 3 divisions. The 1st Canadian Division landed on Juno Beach. The 3rd Canadian Division finally got in the act, along with the 4th Canadian Armored Division and the rebuilt 2nd Canadian Division that had suffered so badly at the Battle of Dieppe. What I'm trying to point out here is that it seems that every time there was a major offensive, Canada was there to lead it. Canada was selected to lead it. This is our heritage. We're first in everything. Canada was also, the first in Afghanistan to recognize, firstly, that we had to deal with people. We didn't know our enemy that well. And Canada had had about 18 to 20 years of peacekeeping training. There were 34 different countries that Canada provided troops for peacekeeping services through the United Nations and NATO. And Canada is still recognized today, as we've pulled out of Afghanistan, as leaders in the peacekeeping area. And will continue to be recognized as that. Now, that's basically our military heritage. I could go into much, much more detail, but there just isn't the time for it. But what I want to do is flip over and say, what do we do in peacetime? Well, in peacetime, we put the first jet airliner in North American skies, the Avro jet airliner. And we had orders to produce it. Howard Hughes actually flew it, and he was prepared to buy 20 of these jet airliners to start the first jet airliner service in North America. It was canceled by Mr. Diefenbaker because we were working on another project called the Arrow, the CF-100 Avro Arrow. And here we developed and built the first supersonic jet interceptor in the world. Now, we had jet planes, we had the CF-100, Britain had jet planes, America had jet planes, but they didn't have a jet like the supersonic jet, the Avro Arrow. And we all know what happened to that. It was called Black Friday when the project was completed, or canceled really, by John Diefenbaker. I'm not being political when I bring that up, but I just didn't like the guy. It was called Black Friday, the end of February in 1959, and then all of a sudden they put 16,000 people out of work. But what happened? Most of all of these engineers went to the U.S. and started assisting the U.S. with their space program. We put the U.S. on the moon. No? Anybody want to argue about it? More than that, we built the Canadarm, and the U.S. and Russia wouldn't have a space station in outer space today without the Canadarm. This has been our Canadian heritage. I'm not going to carry on any further. I want to thank you for listening to me. I had intended on covering much more territory in terms of dates and details, but you people will appreciate what I've said. I would have been thrilled to be able to talk to the younger people this evening. I'm sorry they're not not available. Anyway, thank you very much for your time and attention, and have a good evening.
What a wonderful history lesson we just had, and I hope you all enjoyed it like I did. I want to thank Bill officially. Did you want to say something, Bob?
Joe?
Joe wants to say a few words.
Okay. Would you like to step right up here and have a word? I'll give you the mic, and you're welcome to say something.
I just want to thank 6 people: Pearl and Darcy Wilson, Francis and George Jessup, and the only name I knew them by was Brigham Young and Aunt Em. That's the only names I knew them by. Fred and Margaret, please stand. This is Pearl and Darcy's son and daughter. Please stand, 2 of you. Fine. They're a lot of good times in Lakefield, and without them, I don't know what would happen to my dad, but we're always welcome there all the time, and they're very special. And I can remember Frances and George's 50th wedding anniversary. She remembered my dad. He was passed away at that time, and she left a space for my dad. That's the type of people that they were.
Thank you, Bob.
Would you mention? When Gary mentioned about Margie, or the other recipient of the Queen's Medal, Margie, would you like to come up and be recognized? This is Fred and Darcy's daughter. One of the many, they actually used to be my neighbors and the Weetong's neighbors. And I'd like you to explain why you did win the medal.
Well, this is my first time to wear it, and I wanted to wear it for my hometown because this is where I was born and raised. And I live in Newcastle, and the Highway of Heroes pass us. So time after time, I stood on the bridge, and I watched our troops come down. And everybody would say, what can I do? I need to do something. I want to do something. These men and women give their lives, risk their lives on a daily basis so that we can live free in a country that we love. What can I do? So I went home and I thought, all night I was awake. And so I came up with this banner. Now I'm the only senior citizen, gray-haired, non-militant, holding a contract with the military. And the military has approached me, and we've now changed it, and it's got the 4 criteria of the government and the military. It is in French and English. It has a flag on the top. And the military has now patented the yellow ribbon. So you just can't buy a shirt and take it out and have a yellow ribbon on it. You have to have their permission. So I want you, when you see anybody in uniform, I want you to thank them. I want you to thank them for risking their lives on a daily basis. And just like Edward, you know, we never talked about it. I just didn't know. I remember in the schoolyard meeting on Remembrance Day, and we walked down Regent Street to the cenotaph. And my mother said to me when I come home, she says, what the hell were you doing? You were running. Why were you running? I said I was afraid the Germans were going to bomb. And I didn't know what to do. And then she told me about Edward. So educate your children, your grandchildren, and tell them all about it. And as I say, don't forget, we live free in this country. We can do what we want, and it's because of them. And thank you. And I am a Wilson, and I was awarded the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal. And I got an email from the Lieutenant Governor, and he said, congratulations, small-time girl.
I'd like you to help me say thank you to Bill Hike. I have a little plaque that we're going to present to him and he can put on his desk, and it says, "A very special thank you to William Hike for your contribution to a meeting on September 27th, 2012 of the Lakefield Historical Society." And to this, I would like to give this to Bill with our thanks, and let's have a big hand. So at this stage, we have Neil, who would like to give you a little more historical information.
I'd like to comment, Bill, you mentioned you'd like to have a much younger audience. Well, I sure wish I was quite a bit younger. Anyhow, well, I wanted to tell you about a project that Don Webster and I were talking, and we had some concern that although we constantly repeat the slogan, "Lest we forget," in reality, many of our veterans, those who have made the supreme sacrifice and others who served valiantly, are recognized once a year, and even then, only by name. So Don and I decided that we would undertake a project to identify all the Lakefield and area veterans of all wars. To date, we have over 300 names listed. It is our aim to obtain as many photos as possible, preferably in military dress, and to include a narrative of both their military service and their life in Lakefield, so that they become real people, people that we can identify with, people that we can remember because of things they did, and the way they lived in Lakefield, and the way they served in the war. When complete in booklet form, this will become a valuable part of our Lakefield Historical Society collection and a tremendous aid to genealogical research. But we seek your help in this. We can't do it alone. You can imagine the magnitude. Already we have a book that's about yay thick, hardly keep it under my bed. And we want to have your assistance in providing information on family and relatives and friends, and providing us with photos, which we will copy and return to you. And it can only truly be a success with your assistance. I would also like to point out that this is one of the many ways that your Lakefield Historical Society and your membership hopes to serve the memories and the history and the preservation of same in Lakefield. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. That was a good message. And now, as we wind down, there are just a couple of things that I'll pull out my notes. Never forget. Postcards. We have postcards for sale, and they're sitting right at the back there. As a couple of people mentioned they want postcards, so don't forget they're at the back on your way out. They're $1 a piece each, 6 for $5. Bargain day. We also have, we want you to spend some time afterwards with local chatter and meet some of our guests tonight and talk to them. Look at the displays, spend some time, have a coffee, have a cookie, and have some chat. We have a card that we have prepared to send to Don Webster, and anyone that would like to would be welcome to sign it and to wish him the best as he recovers from a pretty serious heart operation. We want you to enjoy the coffee. There is coffee on, isn't there, Jeannie? She's busy putting things together at the back. So with that, I would like, yes, you have a comment? Speak up, would you like the mic?
I won't take long, but I just want Bill to realize there is an element of hope with the young people taking pride in our Canadian veterans, and especially from here. 2 years ago, thanks to Arnold Graham, who is here, I went with Arnold to Holland to celebrate the 65th anniversary of VE Day. Arnold went on the plane with his uniform on. I'm going to cry. We were on a Lufthansa, which was the Dutch plane, and you know how tough security is. The stewardess came down to Arnold as he was dressed in his RCAF uniform and said, "Would you go with me to the cockpit?" Arnold had the honor of sitting with the pilot the entire way to Holland, and that is not allowed, but the Dutch had such pride and respect for our Canadian vets that Arnold Graham was allowed to do that. And it was wonderful, just wonderful. Another thing about the youth, as I walked with Arnold to the cemetery with the Dutch royal family, Canadian youth lined the way holding the most beautiful quilts, and the Dutch military escorted each of our Canadian vets to a special seat. And during the ceremony, the youth of Holland were allowed to speak before the senior Dutch royal family. If you have relatives that died over there, do not despair. Every school child adopts a Canadian gravesite, looks after it the entire school years that they go through. We also had the honor, because we have also here Lance Hill. We found the gravesite of Lance Hill's father, and it just brought more pride back to Lakefield again. So the youth were handed the torch by the senior vets so that the word continues on. And I was ever so proud of Arnold that day. Thank you for all the vets.
Thank you very much for those additional comments. Does anyone else have anything they would like to add before we call a close to our meeting? One thing we haven't done yet is we haven't had the minutes of our last meeting read. I wonder, is Sandy still here? Would you take a minute just to read us the last minutes, and we'll adopt those for our records? Would you like me to hold the mic, or do you think you can handle it?
Not sure what this is going to be like. Linda.